Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host TJ Mabardi. Today is Tuesday, August 6th, and we are going to be coming to you with some updates surrounding the Brandon Aiyuk trade situation. I thought this was going to be a little bit of a story that was already finished, but just yesterday we got some updates on where things currently stand, and Brandon Aiyuk might actually be on the move within the next couple days. So I'll explain why I say that and some of the reporting that has been surrounding the San Francisco 49ers wide receiver. And then we are going to be diving into the NFL Top 100 list that officially came out with the full list over the weekend. So just want to share some thoughts about the overall process of how this list comes about and how I think that the NFL can improve the way that they do this activity, and as well just some of the meaningful surprises that came with the results of this list. We will then be previewing the Dallas Cowboys upcoming season, America's team. So we'll be breaking down all of the biggest storylines following the team after what was a pretty uneventful, noisy offseason. So I'll further elaborate on what I mean there. And then in the latter half of the show, we'll be reacting to the Lauri Markkanen contract extension that was announced this morning with the Utah Jazz. And finally, we will be recapping all of the biggest storylines from the MLB in Monday's action. But before we get into all of that, just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. To any of our viewers, be sure to use the comment section to give us your thoughts on the latest happenings in sports as we try and make this show as interactive as possible. And if you would consider leaving a tip or donation, you can use the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker, gsmcpodcast.net. If you leave a comment along with your donation, it'll pop up on screen for everyone to see. Anything would be greatly appreciated there. Like I mentioned, I thought that we were sort of going to be moving on from the Brandon Aiyuk trade rumor situation. It's been one of the biggest NFL storylines throughout the course of the offseason, but especially once the draft took place, I thought that this would sort of become a nothing story. That yes, we understand it has implications long terms and that we very likely will not be seeing Brandon Aiyuk pass on the 49ers past this season. But at this point, the 49ers are in a little bit of do or die mode. Now, not quite necessarily. I still think that their window is going to be open for a handful of years from now on, but they are going to get increasingly more expensive as the years go on, and it feels like this season is the time for them to go for it. And Brandon Aiyuk is a borderline top 10 wide receiver in the NFL, and he is massively important to what the 49ers do on offense. So I didn't think that there was any chance that the 49ers at this point would even consider moving on from Brandon Aiyuk, but it sounds like that may not be the case. Now, there were actually some false reports that were flying around a little bit early on Monday afternoon, but while that was eventually disproven, does still seem to be some momentum towards Aiyuk being moved, which definitely caught me off guard. It was reported by NBC Sports that the 49ers have a framework for an Aiyuk trade with both the Cleveland Browns and New England Patriots. Considering the fact that the 49ers are allowing Aiyuk to negotiate with these teams and a couple other teams on the list as well that he's negotiated with in the Commanders and Steelers, this seems to have some real legitimacy to it. And it sounds like choosing which deal the 49ers would take would to some degree come down to where Aiyuk would be willing to sign off on, that he would be signing a contract extension with whatever this next destination would be. And that was something that again, just sort of came as a surprise to me. Now, the fact that the 49ers are allowing him to talk to these different teams does only go so far. Like I mentioned, the Commanders and the Steelers were both given negotiating rights with Brandon Aiyuk, but it sounds like neither one of them are still really in the conversation for trading for Brandon Aiyuk at this moment. The Commanders pulled themselves out because on their end, they weren't willing to give up what the 49ers were asking of them. And then on the other side, the Steelers were not offering up enough themselves. So the 49ers seem to have shut down negotiations with Pittsburgh there. But it sounds like these packages that currently exist with the Browns and the Patriots consist of, quote, most likely or would likely involve a veteran receiver and a package of draft picks. Now, you look at sort of what that would mean. The veteran wide receiver makes a lot of sense. The 49ers, like I just mentioned, are at a point in their franchise's financial cycle here where they know they are going to have a number of different players to sign to long-term deals. Most importantly, Brock Purdy, who is on the bargain of all bargains in terms of quarterback contracts, that in a couple years when they have to give him in the ballpark of $50 million a year, maybe even more, depending on how these next two seasons go, that is going to eat up a lot of money, and the 49ers are likely going to have to cut costs elsewhere. So that's obviously kind of the biggest thing to take into consideration when looking at the window of this current 49ers team. Now, again, I don't really love the term championship window because as long as you have the right infrastructure in place, I'm not necessarily somebody who is jumping to sort of slam the window shut and reopen it. I want to see what happens from the 49ers here on out. I think they are a very well-run organization. They have a great head coach. They have a very promising quarterback. So I definitely don't want to put any limitations on them. But they are going to absolutely get more expensive. And because of that fact, they are going to need to get something of value that can help them this season if they are to trade Aiyuk, who caught over 1,300 yards for the 49ers last season and led the team in targets, I believe. So it sounds like a veteran wide receiver is what they're looking for. Out of the Browns and the Patriots, the number one name that sort of jumps off of the page there is Amari Cooper, who is going to be an unrestricted free agent after this season. So this would be a temporary fix for the 49ers. But Cooper is somebody who has been a very effective wide receiver for a long time. I think that he is actually a little bit closer to that, Mike Evans conversation than he really gets credit for. Now, Mike Evans is definitely ahead of him in, what their career trajectories look like, but I believe the two of them were both selected. It was either in the same draft class or it was that Cooper was in 2015 and that Mike Evans was 2014, but, came into the league around the same time, and they've both been very productive overall. Where Cooper, we have seen, a number of 1,000-yard seasons, something like 5, 6, 7 up to this point in his 10-year career, and he has continued to be productive even as he has gotten older. Last year, he actually had his career high in receiving yards. Now, he's not necessarily the run-after-catch player like Brandon Aiyuk is. He's a little bit more of a physical wide receiver, but still, again, a very consistent threat that I do think can provide some actual value for the 49ers this season. Again, you're not getting the exact same player as Brandon Aiyuk. I think that Aiyuk is a better player at this point in each of their respective careers. But at the same time, when you are moving off from a receiver for 1,300 yards, if you can add somebody as a replacement that can get you 1,000 yards and some additional draft picks, that's definitely not a bad deal by any means for the 49ers. On the Browns side of that, I would like that a lot as well. I think you get some more long-term control over what Brandon Aiyuk would be able to give you for the foreseeable future. Like I mentioned, Amari Cooper is headed into the final season of his contract. At this point, 30 years old, 10 years into his NFL career, he's not going to be somebody that the Browns are necessarily looking to give out this massive contract extension to as he heads past the age 30 mark. And I think that would be a really nice long-term solution at the receiver position there for Cleveland. Now, on the Patriots side of this as well, it is definitely for the casual NFL fan. I feel like there aren't many people who are probably rooting for Brandon Aiyuk to end up with the Patriots, considering the state of their offense, where there's still a lot of unknowns. Jacoby Brissett is probably going to be the week 1 starting quarterback. Some people are really nervous about the play of Drake May during training camp. I'm not necessarily in that same boat as well. I think that we knew he was going to be a little bit more of a project, and ultimately I think that by year 2 he's going to be in a good enough position, and that would really be when this new contract would be kicking in for Brandon Aiyuk, and that the addition of Aiyuk would be tremendous for the development of Drake May. So I am a little bit biased as a Patriots fan, but I do think it would be a good move for the Patriots. But again, that being said, in terms of the immediate excitement factor, this is a Patriots team that is very mediocre at the quarterback position, at the offensive line position, and at the wide receiver position. I'd say they're probably slightly above average because at running back, because I am a believer in Ramondre Stevenson. I think he's set to have a bounce back year, but it also very much depends on that offensive line, which is not good. So I understand all of the sort of concerns there from NFL fans in terms of Aiyuk being moved to the Patriots. If I'm the Patriots, I'm doing it in a heartbeat. I do have a little bit of, question marks in terms of what can the Patriots give back to the 49ers in terms of a veteran wide receiver. I would have to imagine that the draft picks would be a steeper price for the Patriots, considering they don't have a wide receiver option that's expendable to the degree that Amari Cooper is for the Cleveland Browns. But they do have Kendrick Bourne, where if you are a little bit more of a casual NFL fan, that's definitely not a name that really excites you. But when he has played for New England, which has been a little bit sparingly considering the fact that he had a little bit of a run-in with Matt Patricia and Bill Belichick during the 2022 season. During the 2023 season, he tore his ACL right before the trade deadline, so he missed a lot of the year. But when he's been available for them, he's been an explosive option. And this is also a receiver in Kendrick Bourne who is familiar with the Kyle Shanahan system. The Patriots signed Kendrick Bourne in the 2021 offseason they signed Kendrick Bourne in that 2021 offseason after he walked away from San Francisco because he was looking for more opportunities. He got them. I think that he flashed a little bit of the upside that he has, and now he could potentially make a return at a little bit of a cheaper price for the Patriots in terms of a 1-for-1. It's definitely a massive upgrade for the Patriots, at least, of Brandon Aiyuk over Kendrick Bourne. But the 49ers could get a little bit of something with Bourne and draft picks on top of it. Now, again, it's probably not the most desirable deal for the 49ers. One other thing that I am a little bit interested in as well is, are the 49ers extremely set on replacing Aiyuk with another wide receiver? Because as things currently stand, the 49ers, if they were to run into next season with Deebo Samuel, Ricky Pearsall, and Juwan Jennings, I think that that's a fine core. It's definitely not a strength at wide receiver like they've had in the past, but still a very passable collection of options. You still have Christian McCaffrey in the backfield and George Kittle at tight end, so I think they'd have more than enough offensive options. I'm looking at the contract negotiations and the holdouts that's going on with Matthew Judon, and I think that if the 49ers were willing to sacrifice a little bit on offense and go to the defensive side of the ball, that Matthew Judon could be a very impactful addition to their team for this upcoming season. So just something that at least crossed my mind as the Patriots are now involved in this trade conversation, and there is a pretty glaring player that could be moved in Matthew Judon. Just something that at least sort of crossed my mind. But a week ago, I would have told you there was no way that Brandon Aiyuk gets moved, but it does sound like this has some real momentum behind it. We will have to see because, again, the 49ers, as much as, yes, you feel like you could get a number of draft picks, especially from New England, the number one thing for the 49ers right now is taking advantage of the opportunity they have this upcoming season to win the Super Bowl. And they need players that are going to be ready immediately. Do the Patriots and the Browns have those pieces that can impact the 49ers the same way that Brandon Aiyuk does, or at least on a similar value perspective? We will have to see, but definitely a very interesting turn of events over the past 24 hours from the 49ers. So let me know in the comments section how you feel about this whole ordeal, where you would prefer to see Aiyuk go if he does end up getting traded, and whether or not you think that the 49ers are actually going to have the guts to pull this type of a trade off. But we are going to be moving on here with the NFL Top 100 list that fully came out over the weekend, and I had some thoughts on some of the placements with this, as well as the overall process of how this goes down, because it is a very fun activity, but every year it sparks a lot of issues, and I think that part of that is on the NFL for the way that they go about actually releasing this list. So I'll explain what I mean by that and get further into the details of this list. But first, we are taking a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose, if it's some loose shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast as we continue on here with some NFL conversations, and I want to look a little bit into the NFL Top 100 list that was fully released over the course of the weekend, an annual tradition where leading up to the NFL season, the NFL Network teases this list going 10 players or so at a time, and this year, there was definitely a little bit of controversy that was sparked in the top 10 with Tyreek Hill taking home the number one spot on this list. Now, Tyreek, we just talked about him at length yesterday because he agreed to this new restructured contract with the Dolphins that made him the highest paid wide receiver in terms of fully guaranteed money in NFL history. And Tyreek, I'm really glad that he is getting the credit he deserves in terms of being one of easily the best players in the NFL. I feel like it's him and Justin Jefferson really rivaling for that number one overall spot. It's a really tough call between the two of them. But Tyreek, I think that too many people just view him as just a speedster and look at those years when he was with Kansas City as that is who he is now. He still has that same athletic ability, but I think that he is greatly improved in his understanding of the game, his patience, his ability to read defenses and find the open holes. All of it. I mean, he just makes the Dolphins offense what it is. And pairing him with head coach Mike McDaniel in terms of some of the pre-snap motions and such just almost feels unfair. But, I'm definitely glad that Tyreek got recognition because I do feel like he can be undersold a little bit in terms of what his value is as a football player. But I think baseline here to put anybody other than Patrick Mahomes at that number one spot is pretty crazy. Now, quickly here, running through the top 10, it's Tyreek Hill at number 1, Lamar Jackson at number 2, Christian McCaffrey number 3, and then Patrick Mahomes, Myles Garrett, Chris Jones, Trent Williams, TJ Watt, Travis Kelce, and Max Crosby rounding out the top 10. So I do want to, before we get further into the discussion about the individual placements here, I was looking into when the players actually were polled for this list. This is entirely based off of the NFL players' perception. So to some degree, us as fans or in the media, we can have our opinions, but I do think that you have to properly weigh the analysis of the players who are actually in the league that are consistently in these meetings and are in the film sessions looking at how to defend and neutralize some of the top players in the NFL. So 100%, these are some of the active players I would say are just about the most valuable opinions you can possibly get on who the best players in the NFL currently are. But my issue with this is the fact that I was looking into when they are polled on this, and GQ Sports wrote a feature article on this list just about a month ago, and they said that the voting takes place during the regular season, usually from Thanksgiving to New Year's, which is just kind of a ridiculous concept to me. I understand that players are definitely more accessible during the regular season when you can go into team facilities and the locker rooms and just sort of quickly pull them away as opposed to in the summer where everybody may be scattered. But I still think that, the idea of getting some sort of a sample size from the current season and then voting, but having that sample size be the least valuable, least impactful sample size out of the entire season is just kind of a crazy concept to me. And I do think that it sort of explains some of the placements on this, including Tyreek Hill at number 1, where during that time it seemed that he was going to be on pace for 2,000 receiving yards. So that's why he ends up being number 1. And Patrick Mahomes was having a pretty underwhelming season, at least up to that point, by his standards as well. He was still ranked number 4 on this list, so by no means do I think that it's majorly disrespectful to him. But at the same time, you see him struggling maybe the first couple weeks, and the receiving situation is a little bit of a nightmare, and the Chiefs aren't putting up the same number of points as they typically do. So you vote on it then. I still feel like at that point, Patrick Mahomes should be unquestionably the best player in the NFL, in my opinion. But then we see him able to, despite all of the issues they were dealing with, make the big plays at the end of games to help put the Chiefs, on top in these playoff matchups, and he goes on to win a second straight Super Bowl. So I just think that, taking a regular season sample size for the argument of, well, we want to see these guys actually play, but have it be early in the year where there is more dysfunction and all of that. I think that it's bad practice from the NFL. But, it is what it is. I think especially if you're going to poll during the regular season, at least release it at the end of the regular season and before the playoffs start up, so we see Patrick Mahomes go on to win a Super Bowl, and then we're looking back at this list seeing Lamar Jackson's above him. He just beat him in that head-to-head matchup in the AFC Championship. So I feel like the timing of it as well, you can't have that much time elapse in between when you make the list and when you choose to release it, because just so much happens in between then. I was thinking about this, and I think that the best possible option would be for them to poll immediately following after the playoffs. But if they are going to do during the regular season, the NFL has been kicking around the idea of extending the regular season to 18 games, possibly adding a universal bye week in the middle of the year, some sort of an all-star week. I think that would be the perfect time to release a list like this, and it would be interesting as well. Obviously, I know that would probably be a little bit of a cram for the producers of putting all of it together. Would definitely be more difficult, but I just think it would be actually pretty cool if they released it in the middle of the season, and it would just be funny to see players sort of using it as bulletin board material and just give the list a little bit more recognition, draw more attention to it, as to this point where, to be honest, I don't really care about the NFL Top 100 list all that much anyways, and that's why I'm not going to let myself get outraged by anything on this list, but some people do really care about it, and to that, I just feel like the NFL is hurting themselves in terms of public perception based off of the way they go about this. But as much as I just said, I don't really care all that much about the placements. I did want to run through a couple things here. And I wanted to start with the quarterback position. Top 5 quarterbacks: Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Dak Prescott. Like I said, I think that Mahomes should be number 1 on basically any list that you're talking about with the NFL. Having Lamar above him, I get it. Lamar is, on that next tier right below him, but I still just feel like it's never right to have Patrick Mahomes as, not the best quarterback in the league, because he just so clearly is. But I wanted to zoom out even a little bit more, extending the list there. CJ Stroud ranked as the number 6 quarterback, then Brock Purdy, Jordan Love, Tua Tagovailoa, and at number 10, Joe Burrow. Number 39 overall player, number 10 quarterback, which is lunacy in my eyes. Again, this is a little bit of an indictment of the players being pulled in the middle of the season. Joe Burrow at that point was dealing with the calf injury early on that led to, him playing worse, the Bengals not meeting expectations and all of that, but I still feel like Joe Burrow is one of those elite quarterbacks, and having him this low on the list is pretty crazy to me. And I definitely was not a fan of that. Especially with some of these other guys. Tua's fine. I like Jordan Love. I like Brock Purdy, but I don't feel like any of them are even are close to necessarily that elite conversation. Now, could they work themselves into it? Absolutely. But Joe Burrow, I think, is just on another playing field at this point. And then I wanted to also highlight a little bit of the conversation around the receivers as well. Top 5, Tyreek Hill, CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, A.J. Brown, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. Jefferson, probably a little bit lower considering the fact that he was dealing with injuries during last season, and CeeDee Lamb had a season of his career. That being said, definitely not going to bash CeeDee Lamb. I think that he is one of those elite wide receivers, so, you're sort of splitting hairs there between 2 and 3. But I was really surprised, again, about the disrespect of Davante Adams, who ends up outside of the top 10 in wide receivers. Puka Nacua, or Davante Adams was actually number 10 exactly. Jamar Chase was number 11. Puka Nacua above both of them. And I'm definitely a big fan of Puka, but I don't know how you can have him leapfrog both of these other receivers that have been in that elite conversation just based off of one half of the regular season. And I think the future is very bright with Nacua, but I think that is definitely an overreaction. And I don't know. Again, ultimately, it's not that deep, and the players themselves are the ones voting. So what does my opinion have in comparison to the players who are actually scheming against them? But I just think that it's a messy conversation. It's always just to spark up these debates that ultimately don't matter all that much. Some of the lists that we put together are so divisive, and it is fun, but I think that the NFL could definitely improve upon the process that they do this list and make it a little bit more meaningful. But let me know what your thoughts were in the comments section, what your biggest surprises were out of it. I haven't exactly put hours into this list, so maybe there were some other big headliners that I didn't hit on. Be happy to respond to what you guys have to say in the comment section. But we are going to now be moving on here and looking ahead to the upcoming season and previewing what's to come for the Dallas Cowboys. So we will be diving into that. But first, a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we are now going to be previewing the upcoming season for the Dallas Cowboys. And ultimately, when you look at the upcoming season for the Cowboys, it has been maybe a little bit messy, considering the fact that during the offseason, Jerry Jones was pretty adamant that the Cowboys were going to be all in, and that did not end up being the case. It was a very quiet free agency for Dallas, and on top of all of it as well, and I think that it's almost a little bit unfair that we are now fully viewing the Cowboys from that one almost throwaway comment that Jerry Jones made, but just sort of to paint the picture here of where the Cowboys are headed into this season, it's been a very loud, uneventful offseason because everybody was sort of waiting on, well, what does this all-in comment mean, and what are they going to do? They don't do anything in free agency, which I can stand behind to some degree at least. I think that a lot of the times teams can hurt themselves by trying to overspend in free agency and end up with bad contracts on the books. But they have 3 star players, 3 of the most important players in terms of the position they play, and having these cornerstones, they signed none of them to new deals during the course of the offseason. Now, Dak Prescott is the only one actually officially headed into the final season of his current contract, but still, Dak, CeeDee Lamb, and Micah Parsons all were eligible for contract extensions, and the Cowboys weren't able to get any of them done. So It's definitely a little bit disappointing there, and especially coming off of the fact that they didn't do anything in free agency. I think people were expecting a lot more, and you also see that they lost a number of key offensive pieces as well, where Tony Pollard, Tyler Biotish, and Tyron Smith, three of their starters on the offensive side of the ball, all walked in free agency. And it's not like the Cowboys had any sort of signing to fall back on and say, oh, but we went out and got this player. So instead, we were just seeing players head out the door for Dallas, and they weren't necessarily returning anything on the other side. So we'll get into specifically the offensive line in a moment, but I do want to look at where the running back room stands now, considering the fact that Tony Pollard is now out. The Pollard running back one experiment definitely did not live up to the expectations that I'm sure Dallas internally was hoping for. So they are going to have to pivot a little bit here. They signed Ezekiel Elliott in free agency, had spent the 2023 season with the Patriots, and ultimately I think Zeke showed he is still a good running back. He wasn't as important as the contract that the Cowboys gave him, all those years ago. He wasn't that level caliber player, but for a cheaper deal, I do think that he is a positive addition for this Cowboys team. But even with that, kind of felt like they were in position, or at least sort of needing to be in position to continue to build on that running back core, and they didn't do so over the course of the offseason. They're running into next season with Ezekiel Elliott as the running back one, followed by Rico Dowell, Royce Freeman, and Deuce Vaughn. None of those players necessarily scream, in the conversation of an elite running back. Now, Rico Dowell has reportedly really been impressing during training camp, and he's going to have the opportunities to emerge as a lead back, but I'm not sure if I'm necessarily there on it yet. Something to take into consideration, of course, but I wouldn't be set on, Rico Dowell being a top 10, 15 running back in the league this season. And with their offense as a whole, that run game is kind of the biggest weakness with them. You can definitely look to as well the red zone numbers, and talking about Dak Prescott, when that field shrinks, his precision isn't quite where you'd want it to be if he ever were to be in that conversation for the best quarterback in the league. But I don't think he's a slouch there necessarily by any means, but really, it's that run game, and I don't think that it got any better during the offseason. Yes, Ezekiel Elliott is a solid pickup and is probably, I'd say, a slight downgrade from Tony Pollard ultimately, but, not anything too detrimental. But I look at that offensive line, losing Biotish and Smith makes for a very significant difference in my eyes. The offensive line for a while used to be one of the biggest strengths of the Cowboys, and now it could probably be considered a weakness. Now, they have some strong guard play with Tyler Smith and Zach Martin, but outside of that, there are a lot of red flags. The tackles are subpar in my eyes. They drafted Tyler Guyton with the 29th pick in this past year's draft, so he's going to be playing a big role for them this season at left tackle. Guyton might have a lot of upside, but wasn't necessarily seen as the most NFL-ready tackle prospect coming out of the first round. So I do worry a little bit there, and at a very crucial position in terms of being the blindside tackle. And then on the other side, Terrence Steele, he allowed 9 sacks last season from the right tackle position. So I think that they are weak on the edges, maybe some upside there, but I wouldn't necessarily bank on them being excellent out of the gates here. And then they don't have great options to replace Biotish at center, where right now it's either Brock Hoffman, a former undrafted free agent with 2 starts in the first 2 seasons of his career, or it is rookie Cooper Beebe, who the Cowboys took in the 3rd round. He came into the NFL, or at least he played his final season in college at guard, Now, he projects that he could be multi-positional throughout the course of his career, but asking him to man the middle of your offensive line in year one, especially after you just spent a full season at guard, that's a lot to ask. Either way, you're not getting very much experience out of that center option. So I think the offensive line is going to be a real issue for the Cowboys this season, and that it's very possible that they sort of get beat in the trenches on both sides of the field. Now, that being said, I do think that their defense is still very talented. Now, they lose Dan Quinn, their defensive coordinator. I think after that playoff performance, there's a real chance that Quinn could have been fired anyways if he didn't take the Washington Commanders head coaching vacancy. But on top of that as well, again, still a lot of talent. DeMarcus Lawrence, Micah Parsons, Osa Odigizua, Mozzie Smith as well, if he can end up taking a jump forward, former first round pick there. It's a very solid front four. You lose some pass rushing help there with Dorrance Armstrong and Dante Fowler Jr. both leaving in free agency, but still, again, you look at that front line and it should be good enough. I also do really like the secondary with this team, one of the best pass defenses in the league last season. You still have your cornerback duo of Trayvon Diggs and Deron Bland. Solid safety play as well. But the linebackers have been sort of the consistent theme of where this Dallas defense needs to improve upon, and I'm not sure if that's really what we've got. They signed Eric Kendricks in free agency, which obviously somebody with a lot of experience, you can say, at 32 years old and has had a very nice NFL career for himself, but has lost a step for sure, and it's just overall pretty weak. Damone Clark, DeMarvion Overshown. Now, Marquise Bell is another player that you've heard, at least I've heard a little bit about his improvements during training camp, that he could take over a bit. Marshawn Kneeland as well. A little bit more on the defensive end front, but can maybe play a minimal role there in pass coverage. So, I mean, I think that they have a lot of names on defense. Obviously, that linebacker group is pretty mediocre, possibly even below average, but I think that their defense is still going to be overall productive this upcoming season. Looking at their upcoming schedule, they are pretty middle of the pack in terms of strength of difficulty. I believe that Sharp Football Analysis has them at the 22 spot in terms of strength of difficulty, so a little bit on the harder end, but ultimately not all too significant. You look at the biggest out-of-division games. At Cleveland, week 1, I just talked about maybe a little bit of the weaknesses in the trenches. I think that could be a little bit of a scary matchup for them. Week 3 against the Baltimore Ravens, another ground and pound team there. Then you have the San Francisco 49ers, week 8. Houston Texans, week 11. I'll throw the Lions as well in there with their matchup then, week 6. So there are definitely some notable matchups for the Cowboys. Ultimately, I don't think that it's anything, all too unbeatable. And they do have a lot of these games, the Bengals as well in week 14 at home. So, and we saw last year the extreme difference in the Cowboys' level of play when they were at home versus when they were away, and specifically the production of their offense during those home versus away situations. That I do think it's going to be enough to have another successful regular season. And even during the stretch with Mike McCarthy and Dak Prescott, where you feel like they leave more to be desired in the playoffs, and by no means am I going to disagree with you there, but you're looking at a team that perennially wins double-digit games, and I think that's going to be the case again this season, where I have them going 12-5. I think this is still a very talented roster. Now, they did probably get worse from last season. I think there are going to be a lot of questions with this team, both based off of their postseason play and additionally, depending on how that goes, what next offseason looks like for them what their plan for Dak Prescott is going to be moving forward, what their plan is for head coach Mike McCarthy. There's going to be a lot of chances at least for change within this organization if things don't play out for them this year. But they should be in a position to at least, they rightfully do have expectations with the overall talent of what they have from the coaching staff and with the roster. So I think the regular season should not be a huge issue for them. I have them finishing 12-5, which up to this point, looking at what I've gone over with the NFL so far, that's tied with the Chiefs for the best record in the NFL, and I still think that that is very much on the table. I don't think that that's crazy. I understand there is definitely a little bit of a bias against the Cowboys because of some of their postseason play, but talking about regular season games, the Cowboys have been very successful up to this point, and I expect them to have another good regular season again this year. But almost fortunately and unfortunately for the Cowboys, we know that they are going to be measured on their postseason success, and that is still definitely to be determined. But let me know what your thoughts are on the keys to the Cowboys season and what your expectations for them are. But we are going to now be shifting gears to the NBA, where this morning we got news that the Utah Jazz are signing forward Lauri Markkanen to a new mega contract extension. So we're going to be breaking down that deal, what potential ripple move it could affect that would see them actually trading for a former All-Star after this entire offseason of hearing about Lauri potentially being moved. Instead, the Jazz might go in the other direction now and end up buying a little bit. So we'll dive into that conversation and more. But first, a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we are now going to be diving into the news that broke this morning that the Utah Jazz are signing forward Lauri Markkanen to a contract extension. As of at least, when we are recording this, I don't believe we have the specific details on what the financial implication is going to be. But from the early reporting, at least, it sounds like a 5-year deal that is going to be worth over $200 million. Now, again, I don't know why it's taking so long for all of the details to be announced there, but it sounds like it's going to be over $40 million per year annually for Lauri Markkanen, who was selected to his first ever All-Star game just last year, not last year, but 2 years ago now at this point, during the 2022-23 season, in which he was an All-Star and was awarded the Most Improved Player award. This past year was a little bit of a down year in comparison to what he had in 22-23, where he averaged 23 points per game, which is still very good, 8 rebounds per game. The efficiency did drop off a little bit in terms of overall production, shot just under 50% in 23, this year at 48, so not overly substantial by any means, and Lauri was definitely in the All-Star conversation early on in the season. Ultimately, the difference was the Jazz really overexceeded expectations early on in that 22-23 season, and that's what gave him the momentum in a very crowded Western Conference in terms of the All-Star spots that he was ultimately able to claim it then. But Lauri is still a very good talent, still yet to really hit his his prime years here, where he just turned 27 in May, and by the time this contract runs up, it should be going right through his prime, where he's going to be in his early 30s by the time that it ends up expiring. This was a deal that the Jazz sort of had to make happen. Now, they were tentatively shopping Lauri during this past offseason. Didn't sound like, especially the way that the trade market was a little bit this summer, that wasn't necessarily going to happen. And Lauri was headed into the final season of his contract that general manager Danny Ainge was just never going to let Markkanen walk for nothing. He had to do this deal for the sake of at least protecting the asset. I think that it's at least a little bit similar to the deal that the Cleveland Cavaliers just signed Jarrett Allen to a couple weeks ago, that in terms of actually making sure that this is still a tradable asset by the time that the market is back up a little bit, that there are some guarantees in terms of the years that remain on the deal. So I think that this was, again, a little bit of a no-brainer from the perspective of the Jazz. Does Lauri line up perfectly with what are, at least from the outside, perceived timeline of the Jazz is? No, not necessarily, considering Lauri is supposed to be headed into his prime years of his career, and the Jazz definitely are not a championship contending team at this moment. But I think that this is going to be something that the Jazz are going to roll into this next season, knowing they have Lauri, trying to see if there is anything in particular they can do to build around him to sort of speed up this process a little bit. I look at Danny Ainge, who even before Lauri at least has been selected to an All-Star game. Danny Ainge, when he was with the Celtics, he sort of put the pedal to the metal a little bit after trading for Isaiah Thomas, who at that point, was the third point guard on the Phoenix Suns. And when Isaiah Thomas came over and immediately showed the impact he could have for them, he sort of sped up the process a little bit. So that's something that I think is definitely on the table for the Jazz here. And that being said, we hear this contract get announced for Markkanen, and very shortly after, there were some reports that came out about the idea that the Utah Jazz could be linked to New Orleans Pelicans All-Star forward Brandon Ingram. And I think that this would be such a Danny Ainge type of deal, buying low on a recent All-Star that a lot of other teams have passed up on this offseason. There's risk involved, sure, especially when you're talking about Brandon Ingram. The health bet is not a very good one, but Brandon Ingram, we know the talent that he is, and again, I think that NBA fans are very off his scent right now, considering the fact that he missed most of the second half of the season with an injury, and when he came back for that playoff series, that was probably a little bit rushed to some degree, that he didn't look physically ready, and him and the rest of the Pelicans kind of got bodied by the Thunder in that first round series. So I think that people are sort of taking that too much into consideration when evaluating what Brandon Ingram is as a talent. The Jazz, as things currently stand, have what appears to be the cheapest overall payroll in the NBA. Basketball Reference has them at just $104.5 million, which is 30th and significantly below anybody else. They are at 104.5. The next lowest team is the Orlando Magic with $139 million. So the Jazz have money to burn a little bit, and I think that bringing Brandon Ingram onto the books, getting him on a new deal, would be kind of smart from them. Now, again, there is risk involved, especially when you're talking about that health bet, but I do feel like for the Jazz in this situation, it could definitely be worth a spin to try and go and acquire him now and end up cashing out a little bit higher in a couple years. And For the Pelicans, I think that this would be a very good trade partner for them as well, considering the Jazz have a young center in Walker Kessler that they were shopping earlier this offseason and ultimately weren't able to strike a deal. I like the Pelicans roster a lot, but I cannot pick them over these other teams that have size, considering the fact that the Pelicans don't really have an option right now at center. And Walker Kessler could very easily slide into that role. And depending on what the price is, I mean, there's a good chance that the Pelicans could find themselves in, midwinter-ish around the trade deadline and be able to go get a player of the caliber of a Daniel Gafford at the trade deadline. Not exactly sure who that player is at this moment. Nick Claxton sort of comes to mind of somebody that's probably even got a little bit of a higher defensive upside, in my opinion, at least. But, there will likely be other center options out on the market when the trade deadline comes around. But Walker Kessler would be a pretty good fit in New Orleans in my eyes. Now, from the Jazz's perspective, again, it would just sort of be, Walker Kessler is the younger player, has shown at least flashes of being an all-world defender, honestly. And, do you feel like with the injury history of Brandon Ingram, do you worry that 3 years from now that there's a chance that Walker Kessler could have a higher trade value than Brandon Ingram? I'd say it's unlikely, but I definitely wouldn't rule it out necessarily. So I can see the framework there of a trade, but going to be interesting to see if the Jazz do actually pull the trigger here. But Lauri Markkanen is here to stay for Utah. This deal does make him untradeable for the 2024-25 season, so we could be revisiting this next offseason, but Lauri is now off the table for any other teams, which specifically impacts the Warriors, who were sort of in the conversation there for a little bit. That's off the table for them now, though. It sounds like they aren't done, that they are going to seek out cheaper deals. I still don't know if there really is a deal that can make the Warriors a favorite in the Western Conference at this point, but it is something to at least take into consideration that they are now trying to seek out other moves. What that may be, we will have to see there. But let me know what your thoughts were on this deal as a whole. Again, thought it was the right decision for Utah, but let me know. But we are now going to be taking our final break of the show, and when we come back on the other side, we're going to be recapping some of the biggest storylines from the MLB on Monday. So we'll be diving into that. But first, a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back. Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast for our final segment of the day, where we're going to be running through a number of the most impactful games from the MLB on Monday afternoon. And we're going to be starting off with what ended up being a great game between two potential playoff teams in the Cleveland Guardians and Arizona Diamondbacks. The Diamondbacks first off, it was a chaotic first couple of innings as this thing played out, where you saw from the beginning there was a number of, potential injuries, ended up being a serious one as well. Both teams were able to score 2 runs in the first inning. Diamondbacks back-to-back home runs to start off the game between Marte and Moreno. The Guardians were able to even it up at 2 apiece in the bottom of the first, but the Guardians starting pitcher, Logan Allen, took a couple balls off the body during this start, where in the first inning, a bouncing ball coming back at him actually took his hat off of his head, and he got checked out there a little bit with the trainers checking out his temple and everything. He was able to stay in there, but then in the second inning, he took another ball off of his leg. Now, unfortunately, on that same play, we saw Gabriel Moreno go down as he was trying to beat out that infield single that came off of Allen's leg, and he does end up reaching first, but it, along the lines as well, ends up pulling something in his groin, so he had to be taken out of that game. It doesn't appear to be too serious, but definitely was a bummer for the Diamondbacks there, but it didn't ultimately end up mattering because the Diamondbacks ended up taking this game to extra innings. It was Jock Peterson that demolished a pitch that was left too close in the zone to hit a 2-run home run to give the Diamondbacks a 1-run lead in the 8th. And then we saw in the 9th inning, Diamondbacks fans are hopefully not going to hate me too much, but I do feel like I'm kind of harping on it a lot, but the closer situation for the Diamondbacks right now is just pretty disastrous at the moment, where Ryan Thompson came in for that 9th inning and with a 1-run lead ends up blowing the save. Couldn't get it done for a second consecutive night here. In his defense, the outfield didn't do him any favors. On a Bo Naylor drive to the outfield, ends up going off of the wall, and there was a miscommunication between Gurriel and McCarthy that was able to almost gift Naylor that extra base, and then ultimately the Guardians were able to pinch hit Schneemann to come in, and he ends up driving in the tying run. So this goes to extra innings. The Diamondbacks are able to win this game, so they stay hot in terms of the win-loss column, and they've been playing really great baseball lately. But I just look at that closer situation and what's going on at the back of the bullpen, and I am really concerned because that was one of their strengths. That's how they were able to overcome some of the odds in order to make the World Series last year. And with Sewald just sort of out of commission for them in terms of being able to pitch those high leverage situations, it is definitely a real concern in my eyes. But this was one of the 2 extra innings games that we got yesterday. We also saw the Texas Rangers able to walk off the Houston Astros. A little bit of a division rivalry going on there. We saw Corey Seager just stay red hot. He's been on an absolute heater lately. He ends up hitting the game-tying home run in the bottom of the 8th inning, which marked his 4th home run in 5 games. So he's been incredible. And then in extra innings, it was Josh Smith, who has just been on a tear this season. Struggling a little bit as of late, but gets himself back in the positive direction with this walk-off home run. It was possibly the biggest hit for the Rangers so far this season. I was doing show prep as I was watching this game, and I was sort of finally talking myself into, is it time to officially count out the Rangers and turn the page on this season? And while it still may be, I'm not ready to fully quit them last year. I'm not ready to fully quit them after watching what they were able to do down the stretch of last season. Hopefully the pitching staff continues to get a little bit healthier as this moves on here. And I don't know, obviously it's the offensive production as well from the perspective of the Rangers. Bats aren't producing at the same level as what you would prefer them to, but Leody Taveras also been playing better as of late. Adolis Garcia You definitely want a little bit more out of him, but it feels like this is a Rangers team that, again, I'm just not fully ready to quit as of this moment. Looking at where the American League West stands as of this morning, the Mariners now have a 1.5 game lead over the Astros. Rangers on the outside looking in, they are currently 54 and 59. They are a handful of games back from the wild card spot, 8.5. So again, that is a massive deficit to try and make up in these final 2 months. That it is very likely that it's probably past their time here, but I'm still not ready to fully move off of them. But definitely let me know in the comments section if I'm being unrealistic with my expectations for them. Definitely not picking them as things currently stand, but I'm just not really ready to rule them out fully just yet. And then we got a matchup between the top two teams in the National League in the Phillies and Dodgers. Both of them have been struggling as of late, and this was the Phillies coming short to mark their 7th loss in 8 games. Now, before getting too negative there, I do want to highlight what was a pretty powerful moment. Freddie Freeman making his return for the Dodgers, missed the previous 8 games as he is taking care of his son, and he was able to come back in this game. The ovation was really cool to see, the emotion that he is currently playing with right now. He was ultimately able to record a hit in this game, so pretty cool stuff there, but it was the home runs from Teoscar Hernandez and Shohei Ohtani that provided the run production they needed. Also want to highlight Tyler Glasnow as well, where he struck out 9 in this start. He's now at a career high in terms of strikeouts in a season as a whole. And so strikeouts for the season as a whole, now at a new high with 164. He is also at a career high in innings pitched, which is substantial because this is a Dodgers rotation that has been definitely struggling as of late. And Glasnow has sort of emerged as the ace, considering all of the injuries that have taken place to your Gonsolins, your Yamamotos, your Kershaws, your Ohtanis, that at this point Glasnow is now the guy to sort of look forward to in the rotation. And you're looking at somebody who's been dealing with injuries for a number of years here, and that's what the Dodgers are now banking on, which is a little bit concerning. Neither one of these teams in the Phillies and the Dodgers playing tremendous right now. Luckily, both of them were able to build up enough of a lead during the first half plus of the season that ultimately it shouldn't be too dramatic in terms of the pennant race in their divisions. But the Braves now 5.5 games within the Phillies, and the Dodgers with 2 teams really sort of gunning for that playoff spot in the Diamondbacks like we just talked about, and the San Diego Padres as well. So could be a little bit closer than we would have anticipated about a month or so ago. We will continue to watch how this series plays out. But individual player that I do want to sort of highlight here before we get out of here is Elly De La Cruz, where it's funny, he just had the interview with Jeff Passan. It was on Sunday or Monday, and Elly referred to himself as the most entertaining player in baseball, and he did just about everything he could to back that up yesterday. 5 at-bats, 4 extra base hits, including 2 home runs. Drove in 3 runs during that, was also able to score, I believe it was 3 times himself, in what was a dominant win for the Cincinnati Reds over, granted, the Miami Marlins. But Elly is just way too he's just such a fun player, and it's funny that he is also sort of addressing it himself about the type of talent he is, and he's not wrong whatsoever. Sure, there are inconsistencies maybe in terms of strikeouts in his plate appearance, but I mean, the man is electric, and I do think that he is going to really emerge as one of the most notable. If the MLB is going to try to lean more into the promotion of their stars. Ellie De La Cruz has to be one of the top names on that list. But there were a number of other games as well. Of course, don't have time to cover everything. I'll note that the Mets were able to defeat the Cardinals in what was just a makeup game from May. The Cardinals have been sliding as of late. I talked about the fact that I do think that NL Central pennant is very much up for grabs, that I'm not totally sold on the Brewers, but Cardinals have been struggling as of late. They're not doing themselves any favors, and while the Mets, sure, it's good for them, they were able to avoid the 3-game slide. I think the more substantial thing is that the Cardinals are plummeting back to just over 500. They're now 57-56, and they're about to start off a series against the Rays that kicks off tonight. So maybe the Cardinals are going to be able to get right back on the right track, but we will have to see. But that is all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for tuning into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Remember to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. Be sure to check us out on social media as well for more exclusive short content. And we will be back tomorrow afternoon, same time as always, at 2:00 p.m. Eastern. We will see you then. Take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that